Hello everyone, welcome back to another live training session here. And we are picking it back up from the previous session where we were working inside of UMG and working on some drag and drop functionality. Now, if you missed the last stream, don't worry for coming to this stream and we'll be picking it up in part 2. We're gonna cover some more drag and drop, so you should be able to learn the basics of drag and drop and apply that to your own projects. So we're actually going to hop right into our project, our existing project, and pick it back up where we left off because we have a ton to cover. So we'll quickly recap what we did in the previous video. So I'm going to hop inside the editor here. And if we play in the editor here, this is where we left off. We had our project up. We have our little action bar down at the bottom of the screen. Currently, we have to hold Shift and press F1 to get mouse control. But once that's up, then we can drag and drop our action bar wherever we'd like on the screen. So we set that up in the previous video. We could also hold Shift and F1 and click this little checkbox here. That will lock our action bar so we can no longer drag it. Shift and F1, uncheck it, and now we can move it again anywhere we want on screen. So we're going to do something very similar to that in this video, in this training stream here. We're going to create an inventory menu that looks pretty similar to this. So again, if you missed the previous stream, we're going to create an inventory menu that will pop up on the right side of the screen here. And we'll be able to drag and drop that anywhere we want on our interface here as well. And then we'll also get into the ability to drag items from the inventory. So if we had our inventory over here, dragging it off, placing it down on our action bar here so that we can have our action bar populated with things from our inventory. And then we'll get into some edge cases where swapping things around inside of our action bar and swapping things around in our inventory, how we handle that type of logic. And then finally, we'll get into situations where we can drag items off our action bar into space out here. So not necessarily dragging them into our inventory, but just dragging them off our action bar. That will actually remove it from our action bar. However, if we pull something off of our inventory, that we could set that up so that we could potentially delete that item or drop that item in our level here. So we'll get into that situation as well. So that's what we did in the previous video, is create our action bar. We're going to pick it back up now inside of our project. We're going to go down to the content browser and we're going to go to the UI folder. So let's go ahead and go in there. And inside of it, we're going to hop over to our inventory widget blueprint. So go ahead and double click and open that up. And once we have that open, we are now inside UMG. So we're going to create a quick setup very similar to our action bar. So on the designer tab, make sure you're on the designer tab. First thing we're going to need to do is kill our canvas panel because we don't need absolute locations. We're just going to delete that. And the next thing that we want to do, we mentioned this in the previous video as well, we're going to click our inventory root here. We're going to hop over to the details panel now. And under visibility, we are going to set this to visible so that it can receive hit events from our mouse cursor, etc., so that we can drag and drop this around on screen. So now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and add the widgets that we will need to construct our inventory menu here. So we're going to do this really quickly. We're going to grab a border from the palette here under the comment section, just left click and drag and drop that down on top of our inventory. While we're at it, we'll go ahead and make some quick modifications to our border. We want to, first of all, change the alpha and the color of our brush color here. So we're going to go to the details panel over here on the far right, expand brush color. Just going to zero out the RGB. So I'm just going to hit 0, tab 0, tab 0. And for our alpha, we're going to set this to say 0.25, something like that. So it gives it a little bit of translucency. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to go back to the palette now. We're going to scroll down until we find a size box under the panel, because we're going to want to specify the size of our inventory manually. So we're going to take this, drag that, and drop that on top of our border. Let's continue to add the rest of the things that we'll need. Next thing that we'll need is a vertical box. We're going to scroll up inside the palette here. And actually, it should be in the panel section. So let's grab a vertical box, left click, drag that onto our size box. And inside of our vertical box, we're going to have some things. We're going to have another border, which is going to serve as the header for our menu. So let's go ahead and grab another border. So let's take a border, drag and drop that on top of our vertical box. And let's go ahead and set this while we're at it. We're going to set the brush color just as we did before. We're going to set the RGB to 0. And for the alpha, we're going to make this a little bit darker than the overall menu background. So we're going to set this to say 0.5, like so. So it's a little bit darker. While we're at it, let's go ahead and set the size of our size box. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go to the hierarchy and click our size box. We're going to go to the details panel and check width override and height override. We're going to override these. So we're going to set this to say 410, and we'll set this to say 125. Feel free to experiment with these values until you get the desired size. Just experimenting and playing with some values. These are the ones that we determined were good for our inventory menu, but you can specify those to whatever you'd like. Just so we get a better indication of what it will look like on screen, I'm going to go to this drop down here and change this to desired size on screen. So this is what it's kind of going to look like on screen. Not necessarily in this location, because we're going to specify where it is in a moment once we finish this up. So we've added our vertical box, we added a border. We need to add a horizontal box inside of our border now. So let's go ahead and find one of those. Take our horizontal box. There it is. So I'm going to take that and drag and drop that into the border. And next thing that we're going to need is some text for our menu header. So I'm going to scroll up, find some text, drag and drop that into the horizontal box. You can see our text is now populated there. Let's go ahead and select our text, go over to the details panel, and let's center that up. So the justification here, let's just center that up, which it didn't. So I think we actually need to do it on this one, the horizontal alignment. Of course not. Of course not. Oh, I know what we need to do, actually. Forgive me. We need to fill first. So let's make sure that we fill. So that should center it up for us. So make sure that it's centered now. There we go. So our text is set to fill. We have a nice border across the top there. We're going to add a little button in the upper right-hand corner of this menu so that we can click on it and close this menu as well. So let's go ahead and do that. Before we do that, let's grab a size box. So we're going to go down to the panel, take a size box, and we're going to drag that into the horizontal box as well. And then inside the size box, we're going to have a button. So we need a button to click on. So we're going to take a button here, drag that into our size box. And we're actually going to add some text on top of our button, just so we get an idea of what it is. Usually you have like a press X to click. We're going to do that same thing. So I'm going to select this text here, go over to the details panel, and just change the text content to a simple X. So that will give us like a little X that we can click on and close this menu as well. Now, just for consistency, I'm going to select our button here and rename this. I'm going to hit F2 on it, just so we have a better name than button. So we'll call this the close inventory button, like so. So now that we have that, we can actually collapse our border. We need to add our individual slots inside of our bag here now, our quote-unquote bag. Let's actually change the text for this before I forget, from text blocks to something more descriptive of our menu. So we'll just call it inventory. So inventory, like so. So there's our inventory menu. And now we're going to add the individual buttons inside of our inventory bag here. So to do that, let's go to the hierarchy. Let's collapse border. And the first thing that we're going to need actually is a uniform grid panel. So we're going to go to the palette, and we're going to find a uniform grid panel, just as we did with our action bar. Going to left click and drag and drop that into our vertical box. It's going to place it directly below it. And now we need to populate this with the inventory slot that we created. So if I undock this real quick, in the previous training stream, we created our individual inventory slots. So if we open that up real quick, it's just a button with an image on it. We're now going to add these to our inventory menu. So we're going to populate it here with those buttons. Those are down under our user created section because we created those. So we're just going to take our inventory slot, left click and drag and drop that into our uniform grid. It's going to add it to our inventory like so. Now we're just going to add the amount of slots that we want for our inventory. For this, we're only going to have, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll have 5, just 5 across the top here. If you wanted to have like a 32 bag slot, feel free to add more buttons. But in the interest of time, we're just going to select this, hold Control C, select our uniform grid panel and hit Control V, hit Control V, hit Control V, and hit Control V so that we have 5 buttons here. And they're all currently named the same. Just for clarity, I'm going to rename all of these. So I'm going to select this first one here and hit F2. And I'm just going to abbreviate it to S for slot, or 0. So it's slot 0. Select this one. And just name those right down the list. So S1, like so. This will be S2. This will be S3. And then finally S4. Now, the reason I started out at 0 again, because our uniform grid panel uses a zero-based sum. So if we go and we select our first button here, currently they're all stacked on top of each other. If we go to the details panel, Currently, they're all set at column 0, row 0. For the row, I think we're fine. We're only going to use one row, but we're going to need to increase the column here. So we're going to change that for these individual slots here. So let's select the second one because the first one will be fine at index 0. So this one, we'll set the column to 1. And then we're also going to hop down to this inventory slot variable that we created when we created our inventory slot widget blueprint. We're going to use this to drive the determining of which inventory slot we are selecting a little bit later on. So we're going to set this to 1 as well. When I do, my inventory slot jumps over a little bit like so. So we're going to do the rest now. So we're going to set this one to 2. We're going to set the inventory slot to 2 as well. And we're going to go to S3. We'll name this 3 and this 3. And then finally, we'll do this one, 4 and 4. So now we have a little menu with all of our buttons in it that we're going to store all of our inventory items in. There's a little bit more that we need to do now. We've set up the visual layout. There's one thing that we need to do on the event graph, or excuse me, the graph. So we're going to actually compile real quick and hop over to the graph now. And we need to create a new variable for this. So we're going to go to my blueprint panel. We're going to click the Add Variable button. And this variable is actually going to be called, we'll just call it Inventory Visible. So I'm going to reselect it here and call it Inventory Visible, not in all caps, I don't need to yell. So let's see, Inventory Visible, like so. And for the variable type, we're going to click this drop down now. And we're changing this to an eSlate visibility setting. So this eSlate visibility is going to drive whether or not our inventory menu is actually visible, which we're going to call and set through Blueprint script. So we're going to compile, and now we can set the default value. By default, we want our inventory to be hidden. When the player presses a button, then we'll set this property to visible, which will display our inventory menu. So let's go ahead and click this drop down here and change it to hidden. Now that we've created this, let's compile one more time. Let's hop back to the Designer tab now. And let's select our border in the hierarchy over here. Then over in the Details panel now, we have that property for visibility. If you click the drop down next to it for bind, we can actually bind it to that property now. So whenever we change this property, it will affect our inventory menu's visibility. Let's go ahead and select this, make sure that it is bound. And then let's compile one more time. And I think we're good for now. There's one more thing that we'll do. We'll hop over to the graph real quick. So inside of our graph here, we're going to kill the event tick. We don't need that, so I'm just going to delete that. We're going to keep our event construct here. We are going to right-click in the graph, and we are going to, let's get player controller is what we want. Pretty sure that's what we want here. Actually, yeah, we want to do both of these. We want to get reference to our player controller blueprint and our character blueprint in case we need to access those a little bit later. So we'll come back to the player controller in a moment. Let's actually first do the player character. So we're going to right click again and say get player character, like so. I'm going to drag off the return value now and cast to first person character. Now this came up in the previous stream as well. If you were using a different character blueprint, if you're using this for a third person template, you would cast to the third person character, or if you're using your own character blueprint, you would cast to that blueprint, whatever your player character blueprint is. But we're using the first person character blueprint, so I'm going to cast to that and connect this up. Then I'm going to right click on this pin here, right click on this pin and promote that to a variable. And we're going to call that variable the character reference. So just so we have access to it. Let's just kind of neaten these up. And we're going to do one more thing. We're going to drag off the first person character here. So we're accessing our first person character blueprint. And inside of it, we created our HUD. So we can say get HUD reference. So get a reference to our HUD. And we're going to promote that to a variable as well, just so we can access it later, so that we don't have to do this casting every time we want to access our HUD. So we're going to right click on this pin, promote that to a variable. And over in the My Blueprint panel, let's rename this. We'll call it HUD reference, like so. And then we'll connect this up, like so. And then finally, we'll come back to our player controller here, and we'll cast to our My Player Controller and get reference to it. So we're going to drag off this now and say cast to My Player Controller. So we're going to hook this up, Going to right click on this pin, promote that to a variable, and we'll call that the controller reference. So controller reference. Like so. And then finally, the last thing that we need to do is take all of our buttons over here. We're going to turn that into an array so that we can access those later. So let's go ahead. We're going to hold control down, hold control, and drag in each of your buttons. So we're going to just left click and while holding control, drag in each of our buttons. We only need to do this once. So let's go ahead and just do that. I'm going to kind of select them all up. And we did the same process when we set up our action bar, since our menus are very similar here. Now that we have all of our buttons set up, I'm going to right click and say make array out of all of those. So we're going to make an array. Once we have that, we need to add all the input pins for the amount of buttons that we have. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we need to connect all of our buttons up to that array. Just connect like so. And then off that, once we have an output array, we're going to right click on this and promote that to a variable, which we will call inventory buttons. It's just going to make it nice and easier for us a little bit later when we need to access our inventory buttons. We can get it from this array here. So let's connect that up. We're going to move this over just because. And there is our event construct. So we're just going to add a quick comment around this. Just hit C and just say event construct get references, if I can spell, and add buttons to array. That's all we need to do. Now we do have one more thing to do, which will come back here a little bit later. We have our close inventory here. There's something that we're going to need to do before we can actually click on a button and close our inventory menu. So we're going to come back to this in just a moment. So let's compile and save. And the next thing that we need to do, we've created our layout now. We need to add this to our actual game HUD. So we've created the piece here. Now we need to add it to our actual game HUD. So let's go back to the level editor here, and let's go to under the UI folder. Let's open up our HUD now. So this is the main game HUD blueprint. So if we double click and open it up, there's our action bar down at the bottom. All we're going to do is go down inside the palette on the designer tab, take our inventory and do the same thing. Just left click and drag and drop that onto the canvas panel, like so. And we're going to click on our inventory now. I'm just going to hit F2 on it just to rename it because I feel like renaming it. We're going to call it the inventory menu, like so. And over in the details panel, there's an option called size to content. We're going to click this this checkbox. So now we have our inventory menu. And since our player is going to be able to move this around wherever we want a little bit later, you could leave it wherever you'd like. For our purposes, we'll start out with it appearing on the right side of the screen like so. We do need to make sure that our anchor is set to the right side of the screen as well. So we're going to click this drop down and anchor it to the right side of the screen like so. Now with that, if we compile and save, we should be able to, well actually there's one other thing that we need to do. If we play in the editor right now, we won't see our inventory. We have no way of actually toggling it yet. So we need to do that really quickly before we can do anything else. So let's go ahead and do that. So to do that, let's go over to our character blueprint. So we're going to go into the blueprints folder. And there is our first person character or third person character, depending on what you're using. So I'm going to double click, open that up. And we just need to add some script to be able to turn on our inventory menu essentially. And we're just going to do that through a keyboard button press. So when the player presses, say I, for example, that will allow them to turn that menu on and off. So let's go and do that. Somewhere in our graph here on the event graph, we're going to right click and we're going to search for an I key event. So just hit I on your keyboard. So we have an I key event there. And for this, let's actually, first of all, right click and let's do a flip flop node. So flip flop node. So whenever we press I, we'll do A and then we'll do B and then we'll do A and then B. So let's just connect that up. Now, a moment ago, I mentioned in our inventory menu on the event graph, I mentioned that we would come back to our close inventory. What we're going to do inside of our player character blueprint is actually create a custom event. So we're going to right click and we're going to search for custom event. So go ahead and add a custom event. And we're going to call this custom event clicked to close, like so. And we're also going to plug this directly into our flip-flop node. So let's compile. And then back in our inventory menu, we can hook that up now. So for our close inventory here, again, if you need to go to your blueprints and UI folder, go ahead and open up the inventory menu. Make sure you're on the graph. and go ahead and select the close inventory. So when you select that down in the details panel, we're going to add an on-clicked event. So when we click that little X button, all we want to do now is get our character reference. We're going to hold Control, drag that into the graph, and now we have access to our first-person character blueprint with this reference. We can drag off of this and say, clicked to close. So this will essentially toggle off our menu. So let's, well, if we connect it, so let's do that. Now I'm going to add a quick comment around this, hit C and say, clicked to close the menu, like so. So let's compile, save, and then let's go back to our first-person character and finish the script for turning on and off our inventory menu. So what we need to do now, let's go ahead inside of our My Blueprint. Let's take our HUD reference here, going to hold Control, drag that into the graph. From it, we need to access the inventory menu that we added a moment ago. So we're going to drag off this now and say, get inventory menu, like so. So we're going to get the inventory menu. And all we're going to do now is drag off of this and say set inventory visible. So that eSlate property that we created, we're now setting that. So go ahead and check this. We're going to hook this up to the A, like so. I'm going to select this node and hit Control-C and Control-V to paste it. Going to take our inventory menu, make sure that it is the target. So I'm going to plug that in. And then off the B, we're going to connect this to this, like so. We just move this over just a little bit here. And we're also going to set this to hidden now. So the first time we press it, it'll make it visible. The second time we press it, or if we click it, it will set it to hidden. So with that, we're almost done being able to toggle our menu. Next thing we need to do, we're going to take our HUD reference again, just because I don't feel like dragging from here. So I'm going to take our HUD reference again, hold Control and drag that in. We're going to drag off of this now. And let's see if we can do this. Set input mode, yeah. So we want to set input mode here. So set input mode, game and UI. This is the input mode that we are going to be setting. So go ahead and choose this. And we are focusing on our HUD reference here. So that's fine. We're going to take our controller reference now. Just drag and drop that on as the target, like so. And what this will allow us to do, if you've ever been playing with UMG and you turn on something and your mouse comes up and you're wondering why you have to click on something before you actually take hold of that particular widget, you need to specify which widget to focus on and also tell it which controller is being used. So by doing this now, when we press I, as soon as we mouse over our inventory menu, it'll automatically receive input and allow us to click on things without having to click on the widget and then click on it again to actually activate things. So we have that set up. The next thing that we need to do is off of our controller reference here, just going to drag off this now and say set show a mouse cursor. So we no longer have to press Shift plus F1 to bring up our mouse cursor. So we're going to set show mouse cursor. I'm going to connect that up here, like so. And I'm going to check it so that it is shown. Going to select this node still, hit Control-C and Control-V to paste it. Going to take our controller reference and plug that in as the target and uncheck this now. And off of our B here, we're going to connect this chain up so that when we press it a second time, we remove our cursor. So we're just about done here. There's one final thing that you could do if you'd like. You could omit this if you don't want your system to function this way. When our inventory is up, we probably don't want the player to be able to shoot or potentially move around or any other things that you probably don't want the player to do when the inventory menu is up. So what we're going to do is create a quick Boolean. So we're going to go to the My Blueprint panel, add a variable, and we're just going to call it menu open with a question mark, something like that. And we're going to set that now. So when our menu is open, I'm just going to hold Alt, left click, and drag that into the graph. We are now setting that to true when the menu is open. I'm going to select it, hit Control-C, Control-V, connect it up, and uncheck it. So for example, now we've set this up. If we go over to, there's some script for firing a projectile here. So this is what is used when you press a button to fire the projectile. We could actually branch now. I could hold B, left click, hold B and left click to create a branch. Connect this up like so. This is totally optional, as I mentioned. Connect our true like so. And our condition is going to be, is menu open? Well, is menu not open? So go ahead and choose a not Boolean, like so. So if the menu is not open, then go ahead and fire. That's what we've just set up there. So now if we compile, and just for the sake of being good, we'll add a comment around this. So I'm just select all this, hit C, say used to toggle inventory. So used to toggle inventory menu. So if we compile and save now, we should be able to test that out. And then I'll get to some questions over here real quick before we continue. So I'm going to play in the editor now. And if I press I, our inventory menu is up. There's our cursor. If I press I again, it goes away. Where's our cursor still up? Cursor should be going away. Let's actually check that real quick. So in our inventory menu, first person character. Oh, so let's actually, why is it leaving that up? So we've set it to show cursor. I might have to debug this. Let's see. So you get to see me debug real quick because that's fun. Let me bring up the play session here. So in the background, I can kind of see. So when I press I, it's not actually going through. Why is that? So let's see. Of course, it's not going through. What we need to do, did we actually add reference to that? I think we did. Let's double check inside of our player controller. So we're getting our HUD reference, pressing I, inventory menu, that's correct. So visible, of course. So we get to do a quick little bit of debugging here. Not quite sure why that's not working. Oh, you know what it might be? Let's actually go back to our main selected viewport, try that. So if I press I, yeah. So it looks like it had something to do with playing in a new window, because I didn't actually test that when I was prepping this project. So of course, when I try to do something that I didn't prep for, it doesn't work. So good to note. When playing in a separate window, it was causing some issues. So it should, yeah, there we go. So let's go ahead and continue now. We've got that set up. Let's check some questions real quick. So does copy and paste in UMG still put the copy in the upper corner of 4.9? That is a question that may need to go to the Answer Hub or the forums. I haven't experimented too much with 4.9 just yet, so I'm not quite sure on that answer. So when you use bind plus, does that mean it ticks or does it listen for a change in the value? So bind plus, does it mean that it ticks or listens for a change in the value? Don't quote me on this, but I believe it does listen for a change in the value, so only when it changes. This may be something for Answer Hub as well. So let's actually continue, because I want to get through and get to the rest of our drag and drop functionality here. So we've set up the script to toggle our inventory menu. Next thing that we need to do is providing the drag and drop functionality. So inside of our editor here, if we press I, being able to drag things from this inventory menu. So we're going to be able to set that up actually just now. So we can close that and get rid of it as well. So let's go ahead and do that. To do that, let's go back to the level editor here. And we are going to be actually working inside of the inventory widget here. So let's go ahead and double click on that. And inside of here, what we need to do is, let's see, let me get my notes together. So we've already set up in the previous video all of our drag and drop functionality. I'm pretty sure we set that up for the inventory slots, but we didn't set that up for the actual inventory system itself. So before we actually get to dragging individual items, I do want to be able to drag this menu around. So we'll do that first, and then we'll come back to the individual widgets here. So let's go and do that. So it's going to be very similar to our action bar. So let's go ahead and do that. And all we need to do for this is, so let's go to the, make sure we're in our inventory menu, or inventory widget, and make sure we're on the graph. And let's go to My Blueprint panel, and we're going to override some functions. Now, again, this is if you missed the previous training stream, this is where we start on the drag and drop functionality. So let's go ahead and do that now. So in the My Blueprint window, let's click the override here. First thing that we're going to need to do is on mouse button down. So we're going to go ahead and click that. The next function that we're going to need to override here is on drag detected. So once we've determined that we're holding the left mouse button down, are we dragging? At that point, what do we do? So let's click the drop down here. And on drag detected is what we're looking for. So right here. Let's go ahead and expand both of those. We'll start on the mouse button down, so go ahead and double click on that. That will open up that graph. So just kind of expand this a little bit. And the first thing that we're going to do for this process here, whenever we click on our inventory menu, whenever our mouse button is held down, we want to get that location of where we've clicked and store that as a variable, because we're going to use that a little bit later when we start the drag and drop procedure. We're going to need to know where we clicked so that we can offset our window from wherever we're dragging. So let's go and do that first. We're going to drag on the mouse button down function here. We're going to drag off the mouse event, and we're going to get the screen space position. So get screen space position of where we clicked. Then we're going to turn that, we're going to convert that actually to local. So we're going to do absolute to local. That's what we're looking for there. It's asking for a geometry input here. So we're going to take our my geometry and just plug that in like so. And the return value is what we're going to use to offset where we're dragging. So I'm going to right click on this return value here and promote that to a variable. And this variable is just going to be called drag window offset. Like so. And I'm going to connect this up. And just again, to help you remember a little bit down the road, I'm going to add a quick comment around this and just say used for drag offset. Next thing we're going to do is take off of our mouse event here. So left click and drag off that. And we're going to say detect drag if pressed. So detect drag if pressed. I'm going to connect this up. And we're going to connect this up. Like so. And we're going to connect our return to the return like so. And then we also need to specify the key here. So we're going to click this drop down and just say left mouse button. So. And then if we compile, that error should go away, which it does. So we've determined that the left mouse button is down and we're detecting if we're dragging, which is used as part of the drag and drop operation. So we're going to hop over to the on drag detected now. So our on drag detected function. And for this, what we're going to do, let's push this over just a little bit, push this over just a little bit. We're going to right click inside of our graph here, and there's a special node called create drag and drop operation. As soon as you type create drag, it should be the only one that comes up. So we're going to create a drag and drop operation is what we're looking for. Just go ahead and select that. It's going to give us a new hefty node here. So let's plug all of this in like so. Move this over just a little bit more. Now, this is where, in the previous video, we created a special type of blueprint, which is a drag and drop class. And we can specify that class inside the drop down here. So if you click this drop down, we have the default one right here. But then we also have additional ones that we created. We created an item one for when we're dragging items from the action bar or from the inventory. But we also created one called widget drag. So when we're dragging the action bar or the inventory menu. So we're going to go ahead and select the widget drag. So go ahead and select that. If I click this little magnifying glass, we'll browse to that item. Just showing this real quick for those that didn't catch the last video. Here is that blueprint that we created of the drag and drop operation class. And what's cool about this is you can specify all the things that you want to pass as part of that drag and drop. So here we're getting our drag drop offset, the widget that we're actually dragging, etc. In our actual item drag, we're specifying a little bit more information that we're passing as part of that drag and drop operation. So that's the drag and drop operation class blueprint that we created. So if I go back to our HUD, we specified that we want to drag a widget. It now populates our drag and drop operation with additional things that we can specify. First thing that we're going to need to tell as part of the drag and drop is the default drag visual. What are we looking at when we drag? We're just going to drag off of this and say self. We're dragging ourself at this point. That's the visual. That's also going to be applied to the widget we're dragging. We're also dragging the inventory menu. So we're going to plug in self as the widget to drag. Now there's also an offset that comes by default with this node. You could probably use that, but we created our own. So we're just going to go ahead and use that. And that drop offset is the variable that we created. So I'm going to take that, left click, and drag it and drop it on like so. Now, before we connect these up, there's one more thing that we need to do. We need to tell our existing inventory menu to remove itself from the HUD. So picture this as our game HUD. Here's our inventory menu, for example. As soon as we start dragging and dropping this, it's going to create a visual. we need to tell that one that was there before to get out of there. So we need to remove that one from viewport. So we're just going to right click and say remove from parent is the actual node we want, but it will remove it from the player's view. So we're going to call that like so. And we're going to plug this in like so. Now we can take our return value. That's going to be the operation like so. So let's actually compile and save. We're about 30 minutes in, it looks like. So we've set that up. Let's go ahead and see. This should actually, let's see, should actually work. Let's see, hopefully. So if I go move this up and press I, so now we can drag it around. There's one thing I forgot to mention. So our drag and drop is working. So there are two things that I want to mention here. So that offset that we talked about, when you left click, being able to offset where our menu is spawned. If you don't specify that offset, say we clicked right here, what would happen when you start the drag is that this window would jump to the to the right, I guess. If I clicked right here, it would jump to the right. So we need to specify an offset. The reason it's still kind of popping is because we didn't set the pivot point. So let's go ahead and do that. So inside of our inventory menu here, on our onDrag detected, there's an option for pivot. It's currently set to center. We want to set this to mouse down, so wherever our mouse down is. So now let's compile, save. If we play, we press I, there's our inventory menu. And now we're getting a drag from wherever we click. So I can click on this side, and it moves it from that position. I could click here. And again, if we didn't set that offset, if we clicked here, our inventory menu would jump to our mouse position, and that just isn't quite what we want. So we've set up our drag and drop for our inventory menu. The next step for us is to get the items inside of our inventory here so that we could drag items off and place them on our action bar, etc. So let's go ahead and do that. See if you have any questions. So how could we apply the discard to this inventory to objects once collected? So discard, if you are referring to removing items from your inventory with this question, we're actually going to get to that in a moment. So if you are referring to, we have our inventory up, we have our items, and we want to get rid of one of these items. What we're going to try to do here in the next 30 minutes is set it up so that we can drag off of our inventory, drop it somewhere out over here, and let go, and then that would remove the item from our inventory. At that point, you could potentially spawn the item in the world at that point. So for our purposes, what we're going to do is just remove it from the inventory, but as part of that script, you could set it up so that when you drag off and release into the world, it spawns an item and applies physics to it and has it tumble on the ground, etc. That's kind of what we're going to start moving towards. So hopefully that answers your question. So let's go ahead and continue. Before we actually have the ability to pull things from our inventory menu, we need to create a quick pickup, something that populates our inventory. So let's go ahead and do that. This is going to be really rough and dirty. So let's just quickly do this. We're going to right click inside the content browser. We're going to go up to the create blueprint class here. It's going to be of the actor type. Let's go ahead and select actor. And we're going to call this the pickup. So that's a pretty good name for it. Go ahead and double click, open that up. And first thing we're going to need to do is add some components to this pickup. So let's go ahead and do that. So over in the components window, click add component, search for a scene component. I'm going to add a scene component, and we're just going to call this the root. And we're going to make that the default scene root. So I'm just going to drag and drop it on top like so. Updates our viewport. For this pickup, all we're going to do is add a simple static mesh and a collision sphere so that when the player enters that sphere, they automatically pick the item up. You could get into a more advanced pickup to where when you enter a collision sphere, you allow the player to press a button to pick up the item, etc. Kind of like we did with the inventory system that's on Marketplace right now. For the purposes of this video, we're going to do it real quick. We're just going to pick up the item if the player has enough space in their inventory to pick up the item automatically. So we're going to need a static mesh to represent the item. So we're just going to add a component. It's going to be a static mesh. So next thing that we're going to add is a sphere collision. So that will be our trigger volume that we will enter. Now for our static mesh, let me take my details panel and just move it over here like so. For our static mesh, I noticed as I kind of watched a little bit of the last stream that when I created this project, whoever's working on this machine before me did not include starter content, so it was off by default when I created my project. So I do not have starter content. I don't have any cool particle effects or any really static meshes to play with. So we're going to use bare bones things here to kind of represent what we got going on. So I'm just going to click the static mesh, click the drop down on whatever objects we have. We have some objects. So we're just going to use the cube mesh for our pickup. That's going to be our pickup in our level, for example. And then what we're going to do is just bump up the sphere, the collision sphere here, so that our trigger is a little bit bigger. So let's kind of zoom out a little bit, and let's take our sphere, go down to the details panel, and we'll bump this up to say something like 8 all around. So when the player enters this sphere, they will just pick up this little box of sorts. Going to go down inside the details panel with our sphere still selected. Inside the details panel, I'm going to scroll all the way down to the collision section. Under collision presets, we're going to change this drop down. We're going to change that to overlap only pawn so that only our player character can pick it up. So with that, let's compile. That's our quick pickup. Let's hop over to the graph real quick. And first thing that we need to do is create a quick variable that will represent what this item's thumbnail looks like inside of our inventory or our action bar. So let's create that really quickly. Inside the graph, we're going to go to the My Blueprint, add a variable. This variable is going to be called pickup image, like so. It's going to be of the texture 2D type. So I'm going to click this drop down, change it to texture 2D, like so. And we also want to make this publicly editable so that when we place pickup items in our level, inside the details panel, we can specify what we want this item, particular pickup item image to look like. So with that, we've set our pickup item. Let's go ahead and get our references because we're going to need to reference our inventory, etc. So I'm going to select all of this and just delete this. We start from a fresh graph here. I'm going to right click and say event begin play. And we're going to right click again and say get player controller. And from this, we're going to cast to my player controller. So cast to my player controller. What we would probably do if I had a little bit more time with this project and setting it up, I would either create a macro that does all of this reference getting for us so that we don't have to do this upon event begin play every time creating this reference chain of references. It's just something that may come when we release this project. You may see some improvements and changes to kind of streamline the process a little bit. But we'll continue with what we have here. So on our My Player controller, we're going to right click on this, promote that to a variable. We're just going to call it the controller reference. So, and we're also going to get reference to our player character. So I'm going to right click, get player character. Trying to pick it up on time just a little bit here. So drag off of this, and we're going to say cast to first person character now, which is our player character's blueprint. Hook that up. Right click on this, promote that to a variable called character reference. So, we've created a reference to all of our critical blueprints, our player controller and our character. So I'm just going to C and say get references, like so. And then what we need to do is actually provide the script for the player to actually pick up the item. So for this, what we're going to do, we're going to select our sphere here. I'm going to hit F2 on it real quick and just rename it to trigger so it's a little bit more apparent. So that's our trigger. I'm going to right click on this and add an event. And again, this is where you could say on component begin overlap, allow input, allow the player to pick up the item. On end overlap, disable input, prevent the player from picking up the item, etc. Or if they're in range, etc. But what we're going to do is just a simple on component begin overlap. Whenever they overlap this, if it is the player character, allow them to pick up the item. So let's go ahead and continue on our trigger here. We're going to drag off the other actor, and we're going to say cast to, if I can spell it, cast to first person character. So cast to our first person character. Make sure it is our first person character that overlaps the trigger and only that. What we're then going to do is hold control, take our controller reference, hold control and drag that into the graph. Going to drag off of it now. And inside of this, in the previous video, we created a function called inventory check. And this inventory check function is going to tell us whether or not we have enough space inside of our inventory to pick up the item. So we're going to connect this up like so. Going to hold B and left click to create a branch. And we're going to connect our condition in, like so. Connect that up. And what we're going to do next, let's take our controller reference again. Just going to drag another copy in just for the sake of it. Drag off of it and say pickup item, which is another function that we created as part of our prep in the previous video. So we're calling pickup item at this point. And it has an input on it. It's asking for the item to pick up. We're just going to reverse drag off this now, and we're going to say self. Get a reference to our self here. So we are picking up our self essentially. What we'll do off the false, just for the interest of time, we'll drag off of this and we'll say print screen or string, not print screen, print string. We're going to say that the inventory is full if the player does not have room in their inventory. So we'll just say inventory full, like so. And the last thing that we'll do, if we pick up the item, we're going to right click, we're going to say set actor hidden in game. We want to hide this actor in the game so we no longer see it in our level. So connect this up. Didn't mean to click on that. Get back here. So back in our character blueprint was it our character blueprint? I just got completely lost. No, it was the pickup we were in. Sorry about that. So back in our pickup, that was just a quick handy. We jumped directly to our player controller when we double clicked on this function here, which is handy. Just wasn't handy right there. So let's go ahead and connect this up. At this point, we are going to set it to hidden so we no longer see it in game. Last thing that we're going to do is right click, set actor, enable collision. So set actor, enable collision. So we're turning off collision at this point so we can no longer interact with it. So we're leaving that to the false. And we're checking hidden there. So our script for picking up the item is done. So let's just add a quick comment around this and just say pick up the item if has space, like so. Now if we compile and save and we play in the editor, well, not if we play in the editor. First we need to drag an item into the level here. That would probably help. So there's our pickup that we just created. I'm just going to drag it into our level like so, something like that. If we play in the editor now, we should see it. If we go over to it, it's going to say inventory full. And the reason it's saying inventory full is there's one more check that we need to do before we can pick up our item. So what we need to do is go back to our pickup here. We can go back to it. We can run to our inventory check function. Let's go ahead and double click on that. Now what will take us to our inventory check. And what we're going to do in here is actually check if the items inside of our inventory, let's move our details panel down here. So the items inside of our inventory, by default, we've specified our inventory is 5 slots. So when it did that check a minute ago, it went and looked at our inventory objects and says, oh, you don't have enough room, there's 5 elements in there. But we didn't check and see if those elements actually have things inside them. So that is what we're going to do here. So we're going to do that as part of our inventory check function here. So what we're going to do, we're going to hold Control, drag in our inventory objects, going to drag off of it now and say for each loop. Move this over just a little bit, move this up, and connect this to this. And all we want to do for this is check, each time we check one of these objects, drag off this and say is valid. At that point, it will tell us if the object is null or if there's something in it or not. That's all we need to do. A little bit more script that we need to do here. Let's right click and, well, let's just hold B, left click to create a branch. It's going to be our condition. So let's connect this up to this, like so. And as soon as we determine that there is one of the objects in here that is null, we're going to create a quick local variable to tell us that. So let's go ahead and go to the My Blueprint panel, local variable. We're going to say spaces available is the name of this, like so. It's going to be an integer. So it's of the integer type. We're going to hold Alt and drag in that local variable. Now off the false, what we're going to do, this is going to give us, if there's something that's null, it's going to come through with the false. We're going to add one to this local variable to tell us how many empty spaces we actually have. So let's take our spaces available, hold Control, drag that into the graph. Going to drag off this, hit a plus sign, so integer plus integer. It's going to say +1. Let's connect this up like so. And we're going to move this down just a little bit because we want to make sure that we go through all of our inventory objects, run this script, and tell us how many spaces are available. Once we have that, we can hold Control, drag in our spaces available, drag off of it now, hit a greater than sign. So is the number of spaces we have greater than 0? That will tell us if we have room to place something in our inventory. So I'm going to hold B and left click to create a branch, connect up that condition like so. Take our completed off of our for each loop once we've gone through them all, plug in our branch like so. And now we're going to set that has inventory space variable that we created before in the previous video. So I'm going to hold Alt, drag that in, connect that up like so. We're going to set that to true off the true. I'm going to select this, hit Control C and Control V to paste it. I'm going to connect the false like so, and connect both of these up like so. So if we get to this point and this value is not greater than 0, it will come through and say, no, we don't have space. So at that point, we can take our has inventory, plug that in like so. And if we compile now, we should be able to test this now. Let's actually see. So if we go over to it now, we can pick up the item. If we press I, it hasn't been added to our inventory yet. However, if we go, let's see, if we go here, we right click on this and we say watch this value, we can hit play, go up here and make this player controller 2. So you can kind of see right there that we have none inside of our inventory. Let's actually try and debug this here, trying to get creative with my screen space here. So watch this section up here. So when I go over to it, the item still says none because we haven't actually picked up the item yet. So I got a little bit ahead of myself. We've determined that we can pick up the item, but we actually need to go to this function here to pick the item up. So let's go ahead and do that. I got a little bit ahead of myself. I'm so anxious to show you that, and I failed. So let's go ahead and do that. So inside of our player controller, let's go to the My Blueprint. Let's go to the pickup item function. Go ahead and double click on that. Here's a nice empty script to go ahead and actually pick up the item now. So let's hold Control and drag in our inventory objects. Can drag off of it now. And what we're going to do for this is set the array element. So we're going to set array element like so. Going to connect this up like so. And what we're going to do is take our pickup here. That's going to be the item that we are going to add to the array essentially. And what we need to do next is tell it where to appear inside of our inventory, which is going to be this index. We're actually going to use a function for that we created called find empty slot. So we're going to drag off of this and say find empty slot. So there's our pure function that we created. Next thing that we will do is drag off our item pickup here. So I'm going to drag to this side and just say cast to pickup. So we're getting our pickup here. Connect that up. Connect that up. And then what we need to do is let's actually drag off of this now and say get pickup image. So this is our pickup that we are referring to. We're getting the image now from that pickup. And we are going to set that to one of the corresponding inventory buttons. So we need to get those inventory buttons. So to get those, we actually haven't done this yet. We're going to hop over to the event graph. So our event graph, just double click on that. And inside of our event graph, what we're going to do is those handy reference getting nodes that we've been creating. We're going to right click and say get player character. So get our player character, cast to first person character, connect that up like so. And this is the only one that we're going to need to worry about. So we're going to right click on this, promote that to a variable called character reference. So character reference, compile. Now we can go back to our pickup item, so our pickup item function. Now that we have a reference to our character, we can take our character, hold Control, drag him into the graph, and then off of him we can access our HUD in our inventory. So we're going to drag off of this, and we'll say get HUD reference. From our HUD reference, we can then get the inventory, so get inventory menu is what we called it. So get our inventory menu. And then finally, off of our inventory menu, we can say get inventory buttons. So that array that we created, get our inventory buttons. Now we need to know which one to actually get. So we're going to drag off of this and say get. And the one that we're going to get is going to correspond to the empty slot that we assign. So right here, we're using a function to find an empty slot inside of our inventory, which we still haven't set that script up. We're going to set that up in a moment. But it will produce the empty slot over here on the far left in the My Blueprint panel, the empty slot that we are going to assign this item to. So we're going to left click and drag that in, drop it on like so. And then all we're going to do is drag off of this and say set inventory image. So set inventory image. We are now defining the image that should appear on the inventory. And the image that should appear is going to come from our pickup image. We're just going to plug that in like so. So there's our script for actually picking up the item. There's one final thing we need to do before we can test, and that's our find empty slot. So we double click on this right now. We haven't set this up. Because we're setting up our system a little bit unique, if we go into play in the editor here real quick, if I press I, in the inventory system that's on the marketplace right now, items are currently added to this inventory sequentially. So whenever you pick up an item, it goes into slot 1, the second one goes into slot 2, slot 3, etc. We don't allow you to move things around inside the inventory in that particular project, but we're taking this project a little bit further, and we're going to allow the user to, say for instance, pull this item out, place it at the end if they'd like. So we need to find an empty slot to place that object, because you could have these two filled, and this one open, and this one closed, and this one open. So you need to find an empty slot to assign that image to. So that's what we're going to do now. So inside of our My Player controller, back on our find empty slot function, this is going to be pretty quick. All we're going to do is take our inventory objects here, hold Control, drag that into the graph. We're going to drag off of this, and we're going to use a for each loop with break this time. So for each loop with break, like so. I'm going to hook this up, hook this up, move this over just a little bit. All we're going to do is kind of like what we did a moment ago, is we're going to search for is valid. So find something that is valid. If it is not valid, so we're going to hold B, left click to create a branch, connect that up. Once we find out that we've found one that is not valid, does not have an object, is null, what we're going to do is then take our empty slot that we said we were going to set. We're going to hold Alt, drag that into the graph, connect the false up to the set, and that index value, whatever one that is going to be our empty slot. So that's also going to be our return index here. So we're going to plug this in like so. But before we directly plug into here, and this is where my neatness completely goes out the window, we're going to take our set and call this break so that we stop checking because we found an empty slot. Once we're completed, then we're going to plug that into the return like so. So compile, save all of that. Let's go ahead and play. And let's try to move this up a little bit now. So if I go over and pick this up, press I, it still hasn't been set. Why is that now? Because we haven't set the inventory image. Is that why? Let's go back and double check that on our pickup. All kinds of failing today. Of course, go ahead and laugh. That's why, because we haven't set the default image. So if you're laughing at this point, feel free. Let's go ahead and set a default image to use for this. So we are inside of our pickup. So go ahead and double click, open that pickup up. Inside the My Blueprint panel, select your pickup image here, click the drop down. Feel free to use any texture that you would like. For this, we're just going to use the UE4 logo here. So I'm going to go ahead and select that as the default image. Now if we compile and we go back to our level, and there's our pickup selected in our level inside the default, or in the details panel, we can see the default image being used there. So we play now, and we run over to it, and we press I. There it is. So there's our item. It's been added to our inventory. So we're moving right along. We still can't drag off of this and drop it onto our individual buttons yet. That's going to be the next thing that we do. We can't drag it off into space out here and remove it from our inventory, or drag it down to the action bar down here, which is what we want to get to as well. So let's go ahead and start working on that. And we'll try to get through as much as we can in this video here. So let's save all of our work real quick. And let's go ahead, while we're at it inside of our level here, I'm just going to hold Alt and drag out another copy of our pickup. and click this drop down and specify something different just for testing purposes. So we're going to use that. So if I were to play in the editor and run over and pick this one up, if I hit I, see now it's been assigned this one. So just so we have something else to play with inside of our level here. So feel free to go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead. It looks like we're okay on questions. Guess you guys want to try and get through this as much as I do. So let's go and continue. What we need to do now is the actual process of moving items inside of our inventory. So with our inventory up, once we drag on an item inside of our inventory and move it around inside of our quote unquote bag, how do we handle that? So let's go ahead and do that. So to do that, let's actually go, where are we going to go for this? We're going to go inside our UI. We're going to go to our inventory slot, I believe it was. Let's open up this graph. So we created all the script in here for moving items, or we started on it actually. We are currently on the on drop here. We haven't created the script for moving the item inside of our inventory. So if I double click on this, we haven't created this script yet, so we need to go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and actually do that. So we're inside the player controller is where we're actually going to do that. I knew it was in there. So we're inside our my player controller. We are on the move item function. So we need to handle actually moving the item now. Move this over just a little bit. And let's see, let me get my notes. Okay. So you can see as we set up as part of our prep work, we created a from, where we are moving that item from and where we're moving it to. We're going to need to know that. So let's go ahead and start on this. First thing that we'll do is create some local variables just so we don't have to drag wires all across our space here. So I'm going to create a local variable. Local variable is going to be called local from. It is of the integer type. So I'm going to click add local variable again. This is going to be local to, where we are moving it to, like so. And there's going to be some other local variables that we'll need to create. We'll create those as we need them in a moment. So first thing that we're going to do is take, let's take our local from, left click, drag and drop that on top of the from here, like so, so that when it gets passed through, we are getting the location of where we are moving it from. We're also getting the location of where we want to move it to, so we're going to drag that on there, like so, and connect that up. So we have local from and local to. Next thing that we need to do is hold B and left click to create a branch, connect this up. Then we're going to go over to our My Blueprint panel. We're going to hold Control and drag in our inventory objects. What we need to check here is, are we dropping this object as we drop things around inside of our inventory? Are we moving things around and moving it to a location where something already exists? So to do that, we're going to drag off of our inventory object and perform a get. Fortunately, we know where we are moving it to, so we're going to take our local to, drag off this, or drag this into the graph and connect it like so. All we're going to do is drag off this and say is valid. So is the object that we are moving to, is there something there already? So we're going to connect that up and connect our condition. So let's move this over. So we'll do the false aspect of this first because that's probably the easier part. So if we are moving to a space that does not have something in the inventory, that slot is empty, we're going to take our, actually all of this script right here, we're going to take our inventory objects, hold Control, select this, and select this as well. Going to hit Control C and Control V to paste it over here because we're still going to need the to and our inventory objects in this get. However, I'm going to hold Alt and left click on this pin here to disconnect this. Just move it over for a second. Off of our inventory objects, we're going to set array element. So we're setting its position here. Just move that up. And let's connect our false to this. Something like this. Now the index that we are setting the object to, which is going to be the item that we are getting from our inventory objects. We're going to drag off this, plug that into our item. That's the object that we are getting to move. And the index that we are setting it to is the position we're moving it to. So our local to here is coming in like so. I guess I could have left that how it was. We do need to tell it what to get. So where did we get that item from? Is from our local from. So we're going to take this, drag and drop onto our local from, like so. So we've moved the item from its previous position to its new position. However, we need to tell its old position to null itself out. Otherwise, you'd have two instances of that item inside of your inventory objects there. So we're going to take our set array element here, hit Control C and Control V to paste it so that we have another set array element. We're still going to use our inventory objects here, so I'm going to hit Control C and Control V and paste that. Plug that into the target array. The index that we are referring to is going to be the from, so where did we come from? I'm going to take our from, drop that on, and all we're going to do is leave the item aspect of that empty so that it sets it to null. Now, a moment ago I mentioned that we were going to create some additional variables, local variables. We're going to create one right now, actually. This local variable is going to be called local swapping. So are we swapping items is what we need to know. It's going to be of the Boolean type. And we're going to set that to false here because we are not swapping items. We're swapping with an empty space here. So let me go ahead and hold Alt, drag that in, connect this up, leave it unconnected, and connect this like so. And you see there's our return node asking, are we swapping? Well, we're going to use our local swapping to tell us if we are swapping or not. So for the false, we are not swapping. We are moving to an empty location. So we are good to go. We can actually set up the true now. We need to set up the true aspect of this. Trying to get to this really quickly here. So on the true, if we are moving to a position that has something already there, what we're going to need to do is let's take our inventory objects here, hit Control C, we're going to paste it up here, just so we're not dragging wires all over the place. We're going to drag off of it and say get. What we want to get is where are we moving it to? That's the first thing that we're going to need to do. So let's take our to, plug that in. So this will tell us where we're moving it to. Once we get the to, we're going to drag off of this actually, and we're going to set that to a local variable as well. So let's create one more local variable. This is going to be called the local temp object, because we're going to need to move this object to the from. So if we are swapping, we get to this point, we move an item to a position that already has something there. Before we switch positions, we need to get the current item that is where we are moving it to, store that as a temporary object that we can then push to the place that we moved from. So a bit of trickiness there, but it'll all make sense in a moment once we start to hook the rest of this up here. So let's take our local temp object. Let's actually turn this into an object. So it's going to be of the object type. Connect this up. I'm going to hold Alt, drag that into the graph, connect this up, and that's going to be connected. That's the first thing that we're going to do is get the object that we are moving to. Then very similar to what we did down here, we're going to set array elements. So we're going to take the set array element here, hit Control C, Control V to paste it, connect this up like so. I'm going to take our inventory objects, Control C and Control V to paste it, as that is the target array. So let's go ahead and plug that in. And the first thing that we're going to do is take our local 2 here. So our local 2, take that. That's where we're moving to. And we need to get the item now that we are moving. So let me just kind of arrange this a little bit. So we need to drag off this, perform a get. That's the object from where we were coming from. So we're going to take our local from, plug that in. And we're going to plug in our item here. That's the item that we're moving. So we're getting the item from a position, moving it to a position. And the place that we are moving it to, we already stored that as a local temp object. We're now going to use that local temp object to place it at the position in which we came from. So we're going to take our set array element here, Control V and Control C and Control V to paste it. Move this over just a little bit more. We're almost done. We're going to take our local from now, plug this in like so. And we're going to take our inventory objects, take our inventory objects array, Control C, Control V, plug that in. And the item is going to be that local temp item. So let's go ahead and take that, local temp object. Well, if I actually drag it, that would probably help. So let's connect this up like so. So with all of that, there's one more thing we need to do. We need to take our local swapping here, hit Control C and Control V to paste that. We then need to set that to true because we are swapping items at this point. Connect that up like so. So we've successfully moved items. If we compile, and I think there might be one more thing that we need to do. Let's actually test this. This may or may not work. So I'm going to right click on this objects here. Let's go ahead and right click, watch this value. I'm going to play, editor. Just kind of move this down just a little bit so we could see this here. Click this drop down, my player. So there's all of our inventory items for testing. So if we run over to one of these items, it gets added to the inventory. This one gets added to the inventory. If I press I, there's our 2 items. I can actually move these around. So you see it is getting moved around here if you watch the very top up here, but our images aren't updating. So we're moving positions inside of the inventory, but we haven't moved these items yet. So we're almost done. So you can see, again, it's moving positions, swapping those 2 around, but it hasn't set up the image yet. We could also, if we take this and move it, say, to the end, it should go to slot 4, which it does in the debug up here. So again, our system is working. We just need to update the images now. So let's go ahead and do that. So there was a function inside of our My Player controller that we created to handle that, and it was called Move Image. So I'm going to double click and open that up. And it's kind of very similar to what we just did. So let's go ahead and do this. And I think we're about an hour and 10 minutes in, so we may have to break this up into one more video. Again, I tend to get a little bit over descriptive when I'm doing things, because this, when I demoed this, I went through a lot faster. So let's go ahead and do this. We'll get to the point where we can swap things around, and then I'll check and see how we're doing on time, if we can continue, or if we'll have to do this into one more video. So let's go ahead and do this real quick. So kind of like what we did before, we're going to create some local variables for these objects here so that we're not dragging wires all across our screen here. So I'm going to click inside the My Blueprint panel. Again, we're inside the My Player controller. Going to add some local variables. I'm going to click this button here. And we're going to call this the local from. It's going to be an integer, like so. And let's kill this. We don't need that. Let's add another one. This is the local to, like so. We do need a local, the image that we are passing through. We need to know what image is being passed through. So we're going to create another variable called local image. And it's going to be of the texture 2D type. So I'm going to click this and say texture 2D. So we've set the local variable to a texture 2D type, like so. And let's go ahead. I think we're going to need to create one more, but we'll create that in a moment. So let's take our local from, drag and drop that on. Take our local to, drag and drop that on so that we have a nice, somewhat clean graph. Take our local image and drag that on. Now I didn't create one for the swapping because we're only going to do this once. We only need to know once. Are we swapping images? Are we dragging one image on top of the other? Or are we dragging one image into an empty slot? That's essentially what we need to check here. So I'm going to hold B and left click, create a branch, connect this up. All we're doing is taking our is swapping, which we set as part of the move item function. Again, back here, this is where we've set that right here. So on our move image, now we're passing that through, letting us know if we are moving onto another item. So again, we'll start with the false because it's pretty easy to do this one. All we're going to do is take our character reference here, hold control, drag that into the graph, drag off of it, and we're going to get our HUD. Again, this is where I think I probably would have created a macro for this. So get inventory menu. And then once you have the inventory menu, then we can access our inventory buttons. So let's go ahead and drag off this one more time. Get inventory buttons. So feel free to add this as a macro in your project, but it gets the job done. So we have all of our buttons. What we need to do now is drag off this, perform a get. So get one of those. And what we're going to do is get the local to. So where are we moving to at this point? Drag and drop that on, connect it up like so. So we know where we're moving it to. So we're going to drag off of our get now. We're going to set inventory image. So set inventory image is what we're looking for. Again, this is off the false because we're moving to a position where there is not an item. So set inventory image. Now that local image that we created that is getting passed through as part of our pickup, that's what we're going to connect here. So let's connect that up like so. And then the last thing that we need to do as part of the false, because we're moving this onto a position where there's nothing there, we need to zero out the previous position that we were at. So all we're going to do for this is drag off of our inventory buttons. We're going to say get from this. We're going to get our local from. Where did we come from? Plug that in, like so. And we're going to set inventory image on this as well. So we'll connect this up, and we're going to leave it null. So we have now moved, we've got our from, we know where we're moving it to, we know the image that we're going to use, the position that we were at before, we're setting that to null, so it zeroes it out. So I'm just going to move this down a little bit. Usually I'd add a comment around that, but we're going to continue. So we'll do the true aspect of this now. We are swapping with another item as we're moving things around inside of our inventory. So how do we handle that? First thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to take all of this here. Going to select all of this. So our character reference, our reference to our inventory button is going to hit Control C, hop up here and hit Control V so that we get all of those. Now we can drag off of our buttons and perform a get again. So we get, and we want to get where we're moving it to. So let's take our to, plug that in, like so. And where we are moving it to before we actually move the item that we want to move to its new location, just as we did before, we need to know what was in that location before we move it, store it to a local variable so that we can pass that object back to the from. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going right now, we know where we're moving to. We're dragging off of this. We're saying get inventory image. So get the image at the position that we're moving it to. We're going to create a local variable for this. I knew we needed one more. And it's just going to be called local temp image. Like so. I'm going to hold Alt, or actually I don't even need to hold Alt, just drag that, drop that on top up here, like so that we set it. And that's going to be the first thing that we do as part of our false here, or our true here. So connect the true so that we get the current image for the location that we're moving to. Now all we need to do, and we'll be ready to test in a moment here, is drag off of our inventory buttons here, off of this get. We want to drag off this one more time, set inventory image now. So we're setting a new inventory image. Let's connect this up. The image that we are going to set for our position that we're moving to is going to be the local image. So that local image that we created, that we passed through here, that's what we're now going to set. So we're going to take our local image, connect that up, like so. Then the last thing that we need to do is tell our temp image that we created as part of this set to go back to the from. So let's go ahead and do that. And actually to do that, we need to create another getter here. So we're going to take our buttons, drag off of this, perform a get. And we need to get the from now. Where did we come from? So our local from, connect that up like so. And now we can drag off of this and say set inventory image, like so. Connect this up, like so. And we have that temp image that we created that we're going to use to pass to the from, like so. So we are set up. There's one final thing that we need to do before we can test this. We need to actually go to our inventory slot widget blueprint. So inside of the content browser here, make sure that you compiled everything. Looks good to go. Inside of the level editor here, go to the UI folder, our inventory slot widget blueprint. Go ahead and double click, open that up. We have our on drop function. So we have our on drop here. Double click and open that up. On drag detected, on drop. Make sure that our swapping is connected. Yours may or may not be connected. Wasn't quite sure if that was connected or not. It looks like it's already connected. We already connected that. But on the drop, we are moving the items at this point, so we need to know, are we swapping or are we not? So make sure that that is connected. So let's actually test this. Let's see if this works. So I press I, it's our inventory. Go over to our item. It picks it up. It picks that up. So we can move this over to there. Of course it doesn't work. So why isn't that not working? Of course. So let's check that. Let's do some quick debugging before we pause for this video. I guess we're going to do one more video so that we can do the actual action bar as well. So we'll do one more video after this training stream. So let's test this real quick and see why this isn't working. So we need to go to our player controller. and make sure all of this is hooked up. So our HUD, let's check our HUD real quick. So in the graph, created our on drop here, so that's fine. Let's check our inventory menu. On drag detected, so our inventory menu I think is good. Let's do one more thing. Double check this. So that's good. This is the point in an actual video. I would pause the video and see exactly what I missed because I was going too fast and I probably missed something. So let's go ahead and check this real quick. Let's go ahead and let me look at my notes real quick. So move item, move image, drag out another copy, inventory slot on drop. So this should be testable at this point. So let's take inventory slot here. That is connected. So our move item, we've set this up. And our move image, set this up, should be selected.
Right at the start, the set nodes.
What's that?
Something about the set nodes at the start. That's very vague.
Connect the exec to the setter.
The first blueprint we looked at was missing a connection.
So our pickup. No, not in our pickup. Of course I'm.
Second node. That right. It's like you're really close. The setter's on start.
So the setter's on start. Oh man, this sucks. Why did I not do this? So that's all set. That's a little bit later. We're gonna get into that.
It's in move image. Set local from to set local to. It's yeah, move image.
Oh. Brownie for you. Look at that. Come on. Come on. Really, guys? Really? Really? That's what happened? See? Epic, epic fail indeed. How about that? So let's make sure that everything else, so move image, execution bin, let's make sure I didn't do anything else completely noobish like that. So our move item, that is set. How did I miss that? Are you serious? Wow. That is really an epic fail. So if this doesn't work now, then I may have to see why that is. Nope. So that's what it was. So you see, sometimes stuff happens. So now we can move items around. We're moving items to empty spots inside of our inventory here. We could also swap items and swap locations. So that logic for being able to determine where are we coming from, where are we going to, moving things around inside of our inventory is set. Again, I'm a little bit more of the wordy type, so this went a little bit longer than I wanted. I do want to get to the point where we can come down here and add items to this. So if you guys will bear with me for one more video, we can do that in that video because we have not set that up. But the drag and drop functionality that we've created inside of our inventory menu, so this functionality for being able to switch things around like this, we're going to do that same thing inside of our action bar. So if you want to try and play with that in between training streams here, you can go ahead and do that, and then we'll cover that in the next video. And then we'll also, as I mentioned, drag down to the action bar here, and then as well as dragging off and into space out here, removing the item from the inventory at that point, versus having something on our action bar, dragging it off of our action bar and just removing it from the action bar, but not necessarily from our inventory menu. So those are some of the things that we'll tackle in one more training stream. Thank you guys for watching. Let me take a look at some of the questions. It says at the end of the loop, let's see, at the end of each drag on a drop bar or inventory, there's a slight snap into new position. Any way to fix it? So at the end of each drag on drop. So there's a slight snap. Let's check this. Talking about that right there? That must be what you're talking about. Let's see. Is there a way to fix it? There probably is. And you know what? That'll be something I'll look at in between training streams so that we can fix it in the next training stream. So is there no more questions? I guess you guys were just following along with me, watching me epic fail. So that is actually going to do it for this training stream. We'll do one more training stream, and I promise to kind of tighten it up a little bit in that one. And we will get through our inventory system so that you have a fully functional inventory system, just like this one here. If I drag it in and I play, we have this full inventory system that we can walk over and pick up items, and we can press I, and they're in our inventory. We can swap them around. We can take them down to our action bar here, place them down here. We can take other items and drop them down. We could swap these around on our action bar. We can take things off of our action bar, but still keep them in our inventory. Or we can take things from our inventory, drop them out into the world, and automatically remove them from our action bar. So we got a lot of things to still do, and our system will be quite nice actually once we're done. So here's our item, and we removed them all from our inventory. One final thing I'll show you that we could do. We'll also get to in the next video as well, or in the next training stream, what happens when I put something on my action bar and say this is slot 1, slot 2. Traditional MMOs, this is 1 on your keyboard, 2, 3, etc. When I press 1, we want it to do cool stuff for us, please. So doing something like that. But then we could also have different pickups that do something else. And if we drag this down, say we drag it back in here and we press 1 again, now it does different cool stuff for us. So showing how you can have different pickups that do different things and can execute different script when you choose to activate them from your action bar. I promise we'll get to those in the next training stream. Thank you guys for watching, and that is going to do it for this training stream, and we'll see you in the next one.